Las Vegas pretends to be about luck, but it's really about timing, and timing is just a prettier word for control. On the night it begins in the lull between last call and sunrise, Nate Avery parks 3 casinos south of where he needs to be so he can watch the Palisade from across the strip like a man casing a memory. He does this for work and for guilt. Work first, his podcast, Off the Record, eats small-town lies and big-city cover-ups with the same appetite. Guilt second. A year ago he chased a rumor so hard he ran over the truth and kept going. That story left a mother without a daughter and a man who still texts him at 3 a.m. because grief likes company. The Palisade wears its neon-like armor, teal crowns, a chrome smile, 10 stories of money pretending to be air. A fountain throws water at nothing in particular. Inside, blackjack dealers yawn behind their lipstick and a keyboard guy in the lounge sings a 90s ballad that wasn't built to survive this much carpet. Security cameras blink like patient insects. Nate doesn't belong here, which makes him feel honest. He films B-roll on his phone and tells himself he's just gathering texture. What he's really doing is waiting for the push notification his source promised. Accident in the rehearsal room, 3:33. The time has been the point of every message for a week, stamped on emails and bar napkins and the back of his left hand in Sharpie like he's the forgetful one. At 3:31, his phone vibrates once. He goes in with the confidence of a man who looks like he knows a shortcut. The elevator has that 3 in the morning smell, glass cleaner and regret. 9th floor, right wing, past a catering tray abandoned by people who call food product. The door to rehearsal C should be locked. It isn't. He slips in sideways and lets the dark decide if it wants him. The room is all mirrors and promise. Riser cubes, scrim, the ghost of fog juice. In the center, a metronome left ticking on a stool, its arm wagging like a small scolding. The digital clock on the wall reads 3:32, its colon blinks like a dare. Nate hears it before he sees it, the wobble of something spinning down. A wire hums. A rig dingles. A spotlight, dead, but posed, points at a trapdoor painted to disappear. He walks the perimeter because in rooms like this the edge tells the truth faster than the center. That's when he sees her. She is not supposed to be beautiful at this hour. People aren't. But some faces refuse to clock out. Aria Vale leans against the mirror wall like she's tired of being reflected. Black rehearsal wear, hair knotted high, a line of sweat at her collarbones like a necklace she didn't pay for. Her eyes do a quick, precise inventory of him and come back with a provisional verdict. Not a threat, not yet interesting. You shouldn't be in here, she says, not bothering to raise her voice. Neither should you, he says, gently, because arguments go better when you don't audition for them. She pushes off the wall and the metronome ticks like it wants to be a soundtrack. I work here, she says. Sometimes. Who are you? Nate, he says. Podcast. Off the Record, and you? The corner of her mouth considers a smile and declines. Aria. I used to do a thing on stage where people gave me permission to lie to them. Now I help other people do that better. Her fingers tap the metronome arm. It stops like a scold cut off mid-sentence. Who sent you? Person with a problem, Nate says. They said at 3:33 there'd be an accident. There's always an accident in Vegas, Aria says. That's how the insurance pays attention. She crosses to the trapdoor and kneels, chalk dust on her knees. But this one, she adds, voice newly careful, doesn't want to be an accident. Nate crouches opposite because mirroring is a trick that's older than most churches. Up close he sees the rehearsal marks on the floor. XX, oh, then a string of numbers chalked small near the trap. 333 not a note. A signature. The latch has fresh gouges, not from panic, asterisk asterisk from intent asterisk asterisk. Who rehearses at 3:33? He asks. People who don't want to be seen, she says. Or people who want to be seen by very specific eyes. As if on cue, the wall clock flips, 3:33, and 2 things happen. First, the room hums, the rehearsal rig above them spooling to life with a sound like something remembering it used to fly. Second, Nate's phone buzzes a second message, real. Aria already has. On the inside of the rehearsal room door, taped where no guest would notice, a vis cassette *** dangles by a loop of gaffer like a punchline you know you shouldn't laugh at. Paper label. A time stamped in block pen, 3:33. Aria unhooks it, flips it in her hands like a magician testing weight. Cute, she says. Analog. Can't hack a tape with a laptop. Can you play it? Asks. She points her chin toward a busted AV cart in the corner, the sort of thing schools sell when they decide nostalgia is a bad business model. On the shelf, a VCR with a sticky eject and a theater monitor thick enough to survive an insult. Nate slides the tape in. The screen births static and then a picture. The same room, this room, framed from above as if the light grid were a choir loft. It's 3:33 according to the timestamp burned into the bottom right corner in square white numbers. The metronome's arm ticks, hypnotic. The trap yawns. In the footage, a woman walks into frame, dark ponytail, black rehearsal wear. She is Aria. Or close enough to make his chest tighten. The woman on the tape kneels, touches the trap latch, looks up at the camera like she's been told where to find it, and says something they can't hear. Then the rig drops, the trap pops, and she falls. On the real floor, Aria doesn't move. She watches the screen the way surgeons watch monitors, detached, proprietary. That's not me, she says, as if doing both jobs at once. Answer his fear and declare a thesis. You sure? Nate asks softly, because he likes to give people a painless exit from their worst sentences. Very, she says and points. Right wrist. I broke mine when I was 18 and it healed with a medal. On screen the woman's wrist is perfect. Also, I've never stepped that close to a trap I didn't set. Amateurs trust gravity too much. Who would stage this? He asks. A new voice answers from the doorway, someone who wants to remind us the house always wins. A man fills the frame like a closing door. He wears a suit the color of a threat and a smile built for donor luncheons. Colby Hart Palisades head of security, Nate knows him from a profile he read with more profanity than prose. Hart steps in, hands visible, the universal sign for, I'm not here to fight, which is how you start a fight in rooms without windows. Good morning, Ms. Vale, Hart says, carefully not looking at Nate. And Mr. Avery. Your show has fans I don't understand. He glances at the TV. His face doesn't react, which is a reaction in itself. We don't watch rehearsal tapes in here. Union rules. It was on the door, Nate says. Hart's eyes finally flick to him. They have the bored shine of glass. Vandalism. Also a crime. Also a thing you've been charged with before, if I remember your work history. Aria slides between them without touching either. We'll take this to the office, she says crisp. And then we'll all pretend we didn't nearly witness a homicide in previs. She ejects the cassette, cradles it like it could decide to bruise, and nods toward Nate. Come on, podcast. Hart blocks the way with nothing but posture. Ms. Vale, your sister is in enough trouble without adding removing evidence to the list. The word sister lands in the room like a dropped coin. Aria's mouth tightens the way people's mouths do when strangers use weapons they found on Google. Lina didn't do anything, she says. And your team knows it. Hart's smile does a small, respectable thing. What I know is that in this city, stories don't pay for themselves unless they end where the casino wants them to. Then you're overpaid, Nate says before he can stop himself. Hart steps aside with a fake courtesy that makes the air feel cramped. Have a nice morning, he says. We'll be in touch. In the hallway, Aria moves fast. Nate keeps pace. He's got the tape under the fold of his jacket now because he's learned the art of borrowing. The elevator is slow. The service stairs are a relief. They take them 3 flights down into a hallway that smells like detergent and coffee that's been re-microwaved enough times to gain a personality. Your sister? Nate says because questions are a habit and sometimes a kindness. Melina, Aria says. Lina. She works costumes. The police think she helped her boyfriend disappear last month. Aria glances up toward the ceiling like the truth is stored in ductwork. He didn't disappear. Someone collected him. Collected, Nate repeats, because words matter and this one has teeth. Aria stops outside a door marked Wardrobe 2 and keys them in. It's a universe of feather, sequin, and thread. Racks whisper. A headless mannequin wears a dress that could convince a man to confess to crimes he didn't commit. In the corner, a tiny TV/VCR combo balances on a rolling cart like nostalgia disguised as a tool. Aria plugs the tape and hits play. Static. Then a new angle. Slot machines, not the Palisades, older, the kind with chrome shoulders and real pull arms. A row lights in sequence, then dies. On the final machine, the reels spin and click to a single line. 333. The camera pans to a payphone with its receiver off the hook. The timestamp stays at 3:33 while seconds don't tick, as if time on the tape has been pinned like an insect. Where is that? Asks. Not here, Aria says. Those are Route 91 relics. Pre-Megasort. There's a guy off Charleston who hoards them. He won't let me in since I told him his snake trick was a fire hazard. The picture cuts. New scene, a neon graveyard ***. At night the busted backs of famous signs sleeping in a desert yard. The camera lingers not on the flashy bits but on the underside's wiring, rust, the bones. A cat moves like a rumor. In a corner of the frame, chalk scrawls on concrete, 333 again, but with an arrow. Aria hits pause. They want us to go there, she says. Or they want us to think they want us to. Who's they? Asks. She looks at him, and this time the almost smile makes it to her eyes. You're the journalist. Give them a name. He nods. Fine. The collector. Someone who doesn't just take people, takes their timing. He gestures at the frozen numbers on screen. 333. Aria lifts a shoulder. In magic we call it the moment of misdirection. Your eyes are drunk on one thing, we do the other. Maybe they like the poetry of it. Poetry, he says. Or control. She goes to a locker, spins the dial, and pulls on a leather jacket that makes the room look underdressed. You coming? She says. But Neon Museum, she says. Before sunrise, the docents are still people. After sunrise, they become guardians of the grant. They move. Out the service door, into the back lot where delivery trucks practice their bad parking. The air has that desert pre-dawn feel, cool like a promise it won't keep. Nate's rental hums to life grudgingly. Aria sits passenger, boots up on the dash until she remembers she's trying to be polite and puts them down. On Las Vegas Boulevard, the strip plays its last song and the city off cue starts singing the new one, Shift Change. Cooks with cigarette halos. Dealers with makeup in their pockets. A woman in a sequined gown barefoot and furious because her cab canceled. Nate drives past the parked tourist photograph and turns onto a street that sells neon the way antique shops sell grandmother's jewelry. The Neon Museum sleeps behind a fence that once aspired to dazzle. The yard beyond glows faintly with the ambient memory of 1,000 nights of light. Aria hops the fence like a woman who has practiced not getting caught. Nate follows less gracefully. His jeans snag and he swears the wholesome way. Inside the world is a graveyard of alphabets SS and OS stacked like bones. A gigantic letter A leans against a star and they both look like they were told to pretend to be tired. The air smells like dust and old rain somewhere. A bird comments unimpressed. Aria leads him not to the famous signs but to the backs. People fall in love with faces, she says. They miss the rigs hold the truth. She runs her hand along a ladder of cold bent conduit and then stops at a concrete pad near a pile of letters too tall to be useful. On the pad chalk 333 with that small arrow they saw on the tape. Nate kneels. The arrow points to a junction box the size of a pizza. It's wired shut with floral twine, cute, almost domestic. He cuts it with his pocket knife because laws against tampering are suggestions when the alternative is being the last person to open a door that needs opening. Inside, not wires, a photograph and a key. The photo is glossy 4x6, the kind cheap labs spit out of memory cards when you ask them to. It shows the Palisade rehearsal room, that same overhead angle, but not the fall. It's a freeze on a frame of Nate kneeling by the trap. Aria opposite, both looking up. The timestamp reads 0333. Someone has written on the border in neat block letters, "You are late." Nate holds the picture in a way that keeps his fingerprints in the margins because habits die petty. The key is brass, not a house key, locker room style, small with a round head stamped C17. Aria squints at the photo, then at him, then at the key. They want us to open a thing, they put us on camera opening a different thing to learn how to open, she says. It's cute when magicians get cocky, it's rude when kidnappers do. We're being herded, Nate says. We're being timed, she replies and tips her chin at the corner of the museum yard where the sky has decided to consider morning. We have 30 minutes before the staff decides to have ethics. They slip out the way they came back in the car. Nate flips the key in his palm. C-17. He mutters, Casino Locker Club condos. Charleston Annex, Aria says. Immediate, not the city. The Palisades staff corridor wing we number by letter C is costume 17s are against the back wall. She looks at him amused by his surprise. What, you think I don't label where my life gets hung? They drive back with the strip rubbing sleep out of its eyes at the Palisade. They take the staff entrance. Nobody Instagrams. The smell here is honest steam, starch anxiety. Aria breezes past a security guard with a nod that could mean I am late or you owe me. He returns it in the universal language of not wanting to be part of whatever comes next. Locker C-17 is exactly where she said. The key slides, turns, gives inside a shoebox with a hole cut in the lid, and beneath it the sound of something that shouldn't be where it is. Tape spinning, a tiny motor doing a job it didn't get hired for. Aria lifts the lid. Inside the box, a micro VHS camcorder, decades old, running with its viewfinder shut, lens pointed into darkness. It has been filming a black square long enough to make the concept of picture feel like a rumor. On the side of the camera, someone has stuck a label like a joke that forgot to be funny. 0333. We record. Who records US? Aria clicks the camera off. The sudden silence makes Nate realize how loud the small machine had been at the back of the locker, taped flat, and index card block letters again, neat as a crime scene. Tonight 0333. The neon will decide. Nate feels the time settle into his bones like a soon-to-be. He looks at Aria and sees the thing he saw when she was a silhouette in a mirror, a woman who has outlived other people's plans. She tucks the microcam into her jacket as if making an oath. What does neon decide, he asks. Aria smiles, and this time it's real enough to light a sign. Whether we're the audience, she says, or the act. She shoulders the locker shut and the door clangs with a bright metallic certainty like a cymbal at the end of a trick. Somewhere out in the casino, a slot machine hits 3 cherries. For someone who thinks that means they were chosen in the rehearsal room, the metronome will still be on the stool waiting for someone to push it hard enough to make it angry again. Nate glances at the wall clock. It's not 3:33, not yet. For the first time in a year, he likes the idea of being on time. He likes it enough to be scared of it. He looks back at Aria and he doesn't say be careful, because people who are careful don't get anything done. He says, we need a plan. She says, we need to be late on purpose, and laughs like a dare. Outside, the sky admits the color blue. Inside, the Palisade pretends it invented it. The day opens like a hand. The tape in Nate's pocket warms with his skin like it's alive. The city hums a key that isn't quite major, isn't quite minor, the exact pitch of a secret deciding whether to stop being one. And somewhere not far, not near, exactly where it belongs, the signals that make neon speak are getting ready to choose. Las Vegas does morning like a hangover, pretending to be a sunrise by 9. The Palisades smells of industrial citrus and clean ashtrays. Nate's recorder sits face down on a room service menu. The vis from last night lives inside his jacket like a second rib across the table at a no questions cafe off Charleston. Aria pokes at eggs the way magicians poke at reality, curious, impatient, not fooled. The neon will decide. Nate reads off the index card again. Tonight 0333. Aria sips coffee and makes a face. If a kidnapper talks like a billboard, believe the billboard, they're building a show. The Collector, Nate says, testing the name a second time. It fits the way a threat fits too well. She flicks a look up, amused. You really named them that? Better than the guy, he says. Anyway, they like timing, we make timing our weapon. Aria taps the table edge. 1 2 3 1 2 3, a silent metronome. In Illusions, 333 is the perfect look here because it's nothing, not and not beginning. It's a glitch. Security rotations, shift clocks, archive rollovers, everybody blinks. And we don't, Nate says. She stands. First we map the pattern, then we decide who blinks. They start where Vegas started, Highway 91, the old diagonal through the valley before the Strip bullied it into boulevards. It's a museum without a roof, pawn shops with neon you can smell from a block away, wedding chapels pretending to be churches, pretending to be theme parks, a warehouse row where old Vegas goes to molt, slot refurbishers, sign salvage, transformer shops with hand-painted warnings about 15,000 volts. Aria leads like she was born with blueprints. He hoards Route 91 machines the way other people hoard grudges, she says, pointing at a corrugated door painted Bardo slot and sign in flaking red letters. Don't call him Bardo, call him Rex, everyone calls him Rex. Inside is a cathedral to apertures and odds slot machines, shoulder-to-shoulder chrome nicked by 100 rings. The air smells like oil and old sugar. A man with forearms like bridge cables and eyebrows you could thatch a roof with looks up from a disemboweled quarter-puller. Rex Vale, he says, not warm not cold. You get me shut down with that snake comment and now you want favors. I want quarters, Aria says, sweetly pulling 2 from Nate's palm without asking, and 5 minutes. Rex sizes up Nate, the haircut, the reporter slouch, and shrugs like he has decided not to throw him out yet. He leads them down an aisle to a bank of vintage slots wired together like a choir. He slaps the side of the end machine. Real strips, our original timing is not. At 3:33, Aria says, do these do anything you didn't? He ask. Rex scratches his beard with a screwdriver. Sometimes the real breaks. Ease up, you get 3 of a kind you didn't pay for, pretty but not a payout. Who else knows that? Nate asks. He gives them the look men give when they're tired of being lied to by decades. Everyone who has ever loved luck enough to cheat it. She feeds a quarter, pulls the arm, the real stutter, 7-bar bell, nothing. She feeds another, but this time she doesn't pull. She looks at the clock over Rex's workbench. 3:32:58. You ready? She says. For what? Nate starts. Click, the shop clock flips. 3:33. The entire bank of slots yawns to life as if a ghost hit spin. All gears chitter. Reels where 1 row stops at 3:33. Decals printed on the strip where cherries should be, not a payout, a signature. Nate's recorder is already running. Is that normal? He asks. Rex spits the way men do when they hate admitting fear. Only since some rich idiot installed a synchronized relay upstream. Something's riding the mains and it ain't me. Show me, Aria says. Rex leads them to the back through a door marked Danger Transformers with a drawing of a lightning bolt stabbing a stick figure. A gray box hums like a hive. A timer relay clicks over every minute. At the top, a thumb-smeared sticker. 333 in Sharpie. Who touched this? Nate asks. Rex shakes his head. Wasn't he here Friday, Monday? It was no footprints, no cameras. I don't put cams near things that could kill you. They attract idiots. Aria leans in like a surgeon. It piggybacks the lighting controller. At 3:33 it drops the brake resistors a hair. Cute if you overlay that on a grid of old signs. Nate is ahead of her. You could make the city blink in pattern. Route 91 to Fremont, she says. Neon Museum sits right in the path. And the Palisade, he adds. Our rehearsal room is on the same circuit. Rex snorts. No sane casino runs show power on the same feed as the signs, but this town divorced sane 3 marriages ago. Nate takes photos, the relay, the sticker, the way the wires have a little extra slack like someone designed it to be pulled. We may need to borrow this, he says. You can have it when the fire marshal pries it out of my cold hands, Rex says, and then softening just a centimeter adds, bring it back wrong and I'll bill you in adjectives. They're not out the door before Aria's phone lights with a text from an unknown number. Don T. Be late again. 03:33. 3 signs, 3 rows, 3 angles. Neon decides. Nate reads over her shoulder. 3 signs, 3 rows, 3 angles. He repeats, museum grid. Aria nods. Already moving. The Boneyard has rows, the big ones live. Aisle A, the old Route 91 hotel signs live. C333 could be C3 3rd row 3rd angle. Angles. Nate asks. Where the rigging eyes on the backs line up, she says, rigs tell truth. Tonight, he says, we test the math. They split the day homework and alibis. Nate calls his Metro contact Detective Priya Saldana and spends 6 minutes burning credibility to earn 2 minutes of patience. Tell me a clean crime, she says. Don't sell me a haunted slot machine. 3 disappearances all logged within 5 minutes of 03:33. Last known near vintage signs outside the Crown Motel under the Horseshoe H and by the Stardust Star on loan to the museum. He says, reading from a spreadsheet he built between coffee and fear. All 3 surveillance systems suffered signal dropout at exactly 03:33 and I have a tape someone staged to look like a rehearsal accident in my pocket. Bring me the tape, she says. It disappears when people touch it. He lies and hates himself just enough. Let me bring you a person instead. Boo. The person who set the timer that's making the city blink, he says, and hangs up before she can tell him to stop being a poet. Aria makes rounds no one knows about. She buys drop cloths at a pro theater shop, chats with a rigging guy who owed her a favor in 2015 and borrows 2 par cans and a kill switch that could murder a light grid without leaving fingerprints. She stops by wardrobe 2 where her sister Lina looks up from a pile of sequins like a person who has been living in other people's sparkle. You look like you haven't slept since 2009, Lina says, then sees the edge under Aria's eyes and corrects herself. What is it? Aria tells the truth like a recipe, no drama, exact measurements, the tape, the locker, the note, 333 the collector. She doesn't say the word kidnapped, she watches Lina say it for her. Jax didn't leave me, Lina says too fast. He didn't, he wouldn't, he was going to quit nights, he was going to. Aria takes her hands. We're going to take him back. She says she means it enough that Lina believes her for a full second, then Lina lets go because loving Aria means learning to survive her bravery. Don't do the thing where you trade yourself for somebody else's safety, Lina warns, folding sequined fabric like a threat. You're not an altar. Aria almost smiles. I'm trying not to be. She leaves a spare key with Lina, the little brass one that opens a hidden compartment in Aria's car, and writes if I'm not back, and stops because she is superstitious. She writes call Tess instead. Lina nods like a person saving panic for later. Dusk folds the valley into the color of plum. They park 2 blocks from the Neon Museum and walk in with a wave at a docent Aria knows by first and middle name. The yard has been rearranged since last night because the museum is always editing its own memory aisles labeled A through H, signs sleeping with their backs up. 3 signs, Aria says, 3 rows, 3 angles. They hustle to row C. The 3rd sign in is a stack of letters 12 foot is curving like snakes. Behind it the brace is cross-bolted to a rigging eye. Aria counts off angles, steps left right like she is doing geometry with her body. Angle 3 puts you here, she says, planting Nate at a junction point where the backs of 3 signs line up neat as a carpenter's thought. What do I do? Nate asks. Watch, she says, and don't flinch. She sprints 2 rows over and does it again at a second triangulation. She drops her par can at 1, the kill switch at another, cables hidden behind rust and memory. She tapes a microcam from the locker under a ladder rung where it will see a slice of the yard at head height. She does not look up at the security camera bolted to the museum office. She assumes Hart has a brother with a feed. 0325. Nate says, checking the second hand like it owes him money. His phone buzzes. Unknown number. Don TB late. Nate with a winking emoji that makes him want to punch a phone. Plan holds, Aria says. We go late. How late? He asks. She listens to the distant hum of the strip, to the transformer whine in the yard, to the little vibration underfoot when the museum's grid tests itself. She waits until the minute flips 0333 and nothing happens because they are not where the collector wants them to be, then nods. Now. They step into their marks 12 seconds late. The Yardwigs. Not the pretty wake of tours, not the strobe of open nights. A relay chunked cheap surge runs the length of the backfield like a rumor catching fire. 3 signs, not faces, backs flick to life. The horseshoe's skeletal supports glow a low wrong orange like someone lit an animal from its bones. A crown upside down in storage draws a straight line across rust, and the stub of the Stardust Star throws a thin blade of light through a seam in the letters. From where Nate stands, those 3 lines cross right at his chest. The microcam clicks on hungry and blind. Aria slaps the kill switch at her station. 1 line dies, the other 2 hold. She drags the par can to throw a counterwash and snuffs the second. The 3rd fights. Ugly flicker stutters through her sabotage like a runner who won T. Believe in knees. Dosen is coming, Nate hisses as a flashlight bobbles at the end of the row. Aria's hand shoots up. Don't move, and they stand mannequins in a graveyard. The last narrow spear of light finding Nate's jacket pocket like it knows where the Vigus is hiding. She kills the last blade with a smooth twist. The yard falls back to dark. The docent arrives, apologizes to the signs under her breath, apologizes to the air for being made to shush 2 adults hiding in her inventory, and leaves in a hurry because she is underpaid and knows it. Aria breathes. He tried to mark you, she says. He used the signs as a sight. Nate pulls the vis out, now warm. The paper label has bled a little where a drop of sweat landed for a second. He imagines 3 lines of neon bending to burn a hole through the jacket, through the tape, through him. He slides it into his back waistband. Instead the pocket feels watched. 3 rows, 3 signs, 3 angles, he says, all pointed at the reel. More like pointed at the person holding the reel, she corrects. Neon decides where the shot lands. He's using the city as a camera aim. Who is he filming for? Nate asks. The museum phone rings inside the office trailer. The docent answers. A moment later her voice echoes across the yard. Aria Vale phone. Aria looks at Nate. He shakes his head. No, she goes anyway because sometimes you answer even when your body says don't. She lifts the receiver the way you lift a lid off a pot you expect to bite. The voice on the other end is a man in love with the idea that he can be anyone if he keeps his word. Still, your sister is distracting, he says pleasantly. We borrowed her. She is fine. You have until 03:33 tomorrow to bring me the reel and the cam. The neon will bless the exchange. Aria leans against the counter because she forgets to remember she is the kind of person who never leans. Put Lina on, she says, now. A rustle, then a voice that sounds like Lina after a sprint. I'm okay, don't. Click. The line dies the way old neon does, once bright then gone. Aria places the phone down very gently as if roughness could make the word borrowed real. She walks back to Nate looking like a woman who has learned to carry fire in her mouth without burning herself but is considering spitting. He is Lina, she says. Nate's chest goes cold and practical. We go to Priya. We will, Aria says, after we get ahead of his show. How? Nate asks. We don't even know where he is. She points behind him at the backs of the signs, at the 3 rigging eyes she counted earlier, at the lines his rational brain refuses to call a map and his gut already has. He built a score into this yard, she says. 333 eyes. Time it's a route, 3 signs, 3rd rows, 3rd angles. Put it together and you get a path along the catwalks of the museum's north fence to the maintenance shed with the little clapboard door. They run it because once you see it you can't unsee. Along C3 across the back of B3, hook left at the star, 3 angles, 3 pivots, 3 lack of obvious doors. The shed sits where it always sat, anonymous, locked with a cheap padlock that has never had to prove itself. Aria picks it with a hairpin because some clichés are just useful. Inside, rolling racks, gel frames, a rain tarp on the workbench, a neon transformer the size of a small dog humming low taped to it, a Polaroid of Lina in a storage room, alive, furious eyes pinned to the camera as if she could untake the picture by staring it down on the white border. A time 03:33 tomorrow. Nate swears, the kind of swear you keep for when lightning hits near you. He pockets the Polaroid. Aria fingers the edge like it's an artery. She doesn't cry. Her face does a smaller, harder thing it learns. We steal her back, Aria says, and the plan that has been building in her bones all day gets a roof. He wants a trade. Fine, we'll build a trade he can't see. Nate nods, recognizing the tilt she gets when she is about to bet the house and the dealer and the manufacturer of cards. We need to break the sightlines, he says. Blind the aim he is using. Kill the relay at Rex S. Replace it with ours. And we make the museum think we're doing one thing while we're doing another, she says. Misdirection. A rehearsal will fail on purpose. A heist across the Boneyard tomorrow at 3:33 that turns his map into a maze. They stand there, the transformer humming like an animal that hasn't chosen a side. Outside, the yard glows faintly with the afterimage of what just happened, light that thinks it's still on because it loved being on. Aria takes the microcam from her jacket, sets it on the bench, and aims it at her own face. She hits record. Her voice is steady and for the first time since Nate met her on Performed. Lina, she says, if you see this before I do, I'm sorry. I made you a story when you needed a sister. I am going to do something stupid and precise. It's how I was built. I will come get you. She clicks it off and hands it to Nate. If I don't make it to the handoff, give that to Priya. Give her the reel and the relay. Make her arrest a timer if she needs to make her hate me later. You're making me an accomplice, he says. I'm making you on time, she says, and the smile appears tired, dangerous, beautiful. His phone buzzes one more time. Unknown number. 3 words. Be the act. Nate thumbs back before his better judgment can interfere. Okay, we will. He pockets the Polaroid. Aria tucks the key. The city breathes like a giant who forgot to finish a sentence. Tomorrow at 03:33 the neon will try to decide. Tonight they choose themselves. Somewhere on the strip a billboard blinks spectacle in 6 colors in a storage room that might be 6 miles or 6 feet from where they stand. Lina counts to 60 over and over to keep her fear from inventing new kinds, and in a yard of dead signs that remember how to be alive, 2 people build a pattern out of someone else's math and make it a plan. They leave through the back gate because front gates are for audiences. The afterimage of the sign lines follows them a step or 2 and then lets go. The night lifts its eyebrow. The city pretends not to notice. Tomorrow Vegas will try to be on time, so will they. They had planned for 3 things that could go wrong: the police showing up too early, the relay frying a transformer and turning the yard into a funeral pyre, and being late. They had not in any of their lists or whispered prayers planned on the rehearsal room being set to believe. Night came down like velvet curtain on the strip, swallowing neon and giving their little car a private darkness. Aria drove with the focus of someone who has rehearsed panic until it looks like purpose. Nate sat with the microcam from the locker in his lap, the tape warm from being in the waistband as if proximity transferred urgency. They met Priya at the corner of Charleston and 9th. She arrived with a uniform jacket slung over one shoulder, pragmatic and impatient in equal measure. "You lock it down and you arrest whoever makes you a reason," she said, eyeing the Polaroid and the relay like an evidence checklist. "You bring me hard proof and I bring you paperwork that screams reality at a judge." They left Priya with Rex. The slot man agreed to pretend ignorance and to not be on site while Priya worked background. Rex's version of heroic support was to pull loose bolts and make a room less hospitable to clever things. Nate and Aria went into the Boneyard under the slate of stars that meant it was late enough that doors stopped pretending to be choices. They moved like 2 people with a married rhythm, quick with words, careful with shoulders. The museum was a tangle of iron ribs and rusted script, the backs of famous lights like the undersides of sleeping beasts. Aria led them without a map. She had traced the angles and rows earlier and practiced walking them in her head like counting beats. They found the maintenance shed, C-17's offstage cousin, exactly where the Polaroid had pointed. Squat, unimpressive padlock chewed by sun. Inside, the sign parts smelled like ozone and old paint. They worked fast. Aria flicked panels, finding the hollow bones where the city used to hide secrets. Nate pried at rusted rivets with a Leatherman he'd borrowed from a friend who thought survival was a lifestyle. The map revealed itself the way a trick does, because someone had expected it to be admired rather than discovered under the sheet metal of a retired horseshoe decoupaged into the ribs. Like a secret was a scrap of blueprint hand-drawn. Lines and angles, 3 rows circled in ink arrows that made the city look like a star chart along the margins. Words in a slow, unhurried hand: Route 333, aim, match, deliver. Nate's pulse officially ordered his tongue to be useful. "It's not a random threat," he said. "It's a program." Aria traced one line with a finger as if verifying a seam she'd sewn. "This is a score, not a plan. Someone is conducting nighttime choreography across the strip. Align the backs, aim the lights, make the city point." And then, she closed her hand like a theatrical fist. "The piece lands where they want it." "Where does it want to land?" Nate asked. She didn't look up. "On a looker, on a holder, on a person who carries proof." They left the blueprint folded like contraband and took a Polaroid copy on Nate's phone. They also took the key because key theft felt smaller than the theft of an idea, and walked away with the microcam snug in Aria's jacket like a heartbeat. Their plan had been to sabotage the relay, replace it with Rex's own timer rig, and then bring Priya the Polaroid and the cam again to get the cops to watch the yard at the right time. That was the official plan. The rehearsal room on the 9th floor, the one with the trap, kept its promise. It was the place a person could survive or become a headline. Their informal second plan was to use it as bait. Let the collector expect Lina, make him reveal himself, catch him on tape. It was theater being used as police work. It was also wonderfully and terrifyingly a thing Aria understood better than most cops ever would. They returned to the Palisade via back alleys and staff corridors that smelled like starch and cheap perfume. The night crew misread them and left them alone. Nate slipped the key back into C-17's lock just as Priya's call warmed his pocket. "We have a detail, 2 uniforms, 1 plainclothes. Will shadow the yard from a discreet distance. Don't do anything reckless." He texted back a winking emoji, then deleted it like a man who preferred mistakes without witnesses. The rehearsal room door had a small post-it when they reached it: "Keep warm, Tech." The metronome was on a stool again waiting. Aria's fingers brushed the trap and found nothing but a recent scratch that didn't belong to the house the way a splinter doesn't belong in a carved bench. She smiled only because her mouth was practicing optimism. They sat in the wings and watched the monitor. The microcam's angle was a sliver of the floor, a spy in darkness. Nate fed quarters to the cart's power module so the system wouldn't die on them, and Aria checked wires and rigging like she was comforting inanimate things. At 0325 the rehearsal room felt like the inside of a clenched fist. In the low hum they heard someone else's heartbeat. Priya's radio. 14 minutes out, Rex's cough, a security guard shifting his weight down the hall as if to clear a throat. They were calm only because they were busy. Busy meant choice, choice meant breath. The monitor blinked to life, the vis static cracked and showed them a picture from last night. The trap, the metronome, the figure who fell. Nate's stomach did a roll. He had not bought a ticket, for he spun the tape back and found a splice, not just a cut but an analog splice, a physical join, crude, visible in the grain. Someone had replaced a single frame, or perhaps a single second, with a different clip. The woman who fell on the tape had a wrist perfect and an angle wrong. The hand that had taped that splice had been careful with the edges, like someone who wanted it to look like time had nothing to hide. "That is not a rehearsal accident," Priya said quietly over Nate's earpiece. "That is evidence tampering." "And stagecraft," Aria added. "Someone knows how to splice footage so it looks like truth. They want footage, they want authenticity." Nate's throat worked. "Who profits from a file that says Lina fell?" "Anyone who wants her out of the game and someone else to pay the bill," Priya said. "Someone who can make a tape look like a confession." They watched the splice frame by frame. In the margin of the tape on the physical casing was a tiny fingerprint in powder, smudged like a thumbprint pressed into flour. It was the sort of human scale clue that mattered in analog crimes, a medium that required hands. That hand had left a smear on the cassette that no algorithm could remove. They had prioritized evidence over impulse. The microcam would show who approached the trap tonight. If anyone did, the relay would be their kill switch to prevent the collector from aligning the yard. Every step was calculated, practiced, and exactly as reckless as a pair of people who had learned the math of danger. They waited until the clock blinked 03:32. Aria's fingers hovered over the kill switch. She decobbled with Rex's tools. Nate kept the microcam rolling. Priya, via the security feed, breathed instructions like a metronome of her own. The plan was a choreography of small lies, fake confusion, a staged rehearsal. A hand off at the trap. The collector shows himself to claim his prize. Priya moves in with evidence. Arrests happen. Lina comes home. 03:33 came like a bell. The room hummed like a hive. The metronome's arm swung. The trap yawned like a mouth. Their eyes met. Two reporters, a cop and a woman who had learned to make illusions of safety, and then the trap shuddered. A whisper of relief, so sudden it felt like a betrayal, slid through the wings. The rig above them twitched patently. Then the lights went out. Not the theatrical blacks they had rehearsed with, but a clean whole room, cut like someone had reached for the house's main breath and held it. Nate's camera kept recording in the dark. The microcam's red LED blinked like a heart. Aria's hand fumbled for a flashlight and then found instead a snap. The whole room shifted. A cable. Metal groaned and then popped with the distinct sound of metal being asked to forget its job. Someone had rewired the trap to accept a different input, not a stage drop but an electrical jolt. The splice was not the only deception. The rehearsal room had been set to become the accident, not just to mimic it. Whatever fell through the trap tonight would not fall into padded wings, it would meet force. Aria swore under her breath a word that sounded like a stage direction. She hit the kill switch with the practiced motion of someone who had made things stop for living audiences. Nothing. The room hummed in answer like a beast offended. "Get out now," Priya said. Her voice was calm and long in the radio because she had decided urgency could be polite and still effective. Nate moved, first instincts trained by chasing stories and surviving them. He grabbed Aria's wrist. She looked at him, at his hand, and then at the trap. For a second their faces were a small private planet, two people on the edge of being destroyed by a show. He said softly, "Trust me." She did not pull away. They sprinted for the wings. The lights returned like a hiss, delayed as if the room had to be polite. In the middle of the stage the trap yawned and a white-hot flash of something wrong. Metal smoke, an aroma of tightened wires breathed upward. The audience of empty seats clapped silently in the catwalk. Someone laughed low and delighted. Nate's camera caught the flash and the laugh, a naked audio splice that later would make detectives look for a voice. They emerged into a corridor of compressed breath and sweating paint. Priya barreled in behind them with two uniforms who moved with the kind of slow certainty that means someone has admissions to make and no time for melodrama. They swept the stage, the wings, the rigging. Someone had been in the grid, someone with hands that knew theater and a patience for making accidents look like fate. "Tell me you have a suspect," Nate demanded, still breathing like a man who had run a marathon he never registered for. Priya's face was half business, half mourning. "We have a list," she said, "and we have one name that keeps appearing on all the margins." She gave him three words that hit like a ledger: facility electrician, subcontractor, someone who could move in. Blindsided. Nate wanted to be the hero who removed cufflinks and made confessions. He wanted to be the man who saved Lina and the woman who made illusions into rescue. What he was in that moment was a journalist with a tape, a cop with a lead, and a partner who had just trusted him enough to run into a room set to kill them both. They were not yet heroes, they were survivors with a splinter of proof. Back in the wings, Aria braced against a pillar and laughed once, sharp and involuntary, the kind of sound that is simultaneously relief and fury. "He is better than I thought," she said. "Or he thinks he is." Nate watched her. The plan had worked and unworked in the same breath. He saw how she steadied herself on the pillar, how the light pooled on her cheekbones, how the storm in her voice was both a professional thing and something personal in that moment. He almost believed they could do this without breaking. Then he realized he was looking at her the way people looked at the last act of a magic trick, braced for disappointment, hoping for truth. "You didn't tell me everything," he said. She blinked. "About what?" "About the splice, about the rigging, about..." He stopped because accusing in a house built on illusions was like trying to nail smoke to a wall. "Did you set the tape to make Lina look bad, did you?" Aria's face went very small and then very hard. "If you think I'd sacrifice my sister to get a story..." The sentence didn't finish because her breath picked up steam like a kettle. "I didn't say that." He said he adored the woman enough to nearly be a coward about it, afraid to be wrong and ruin what was forming. "I said you didn't tell me." "Because you didn't ask," she shot back. "You assumed collaboration meant you didn't have to ask me for the parts that hurt the most." Silence folded between them like a play's interlude. Priya cleared her throat mercifully loud. "We have prints on the splice, they're not Lina's, but they're not a smoking gun yet. We've got a camera on the back alley, and from what Rex tells me, someone moved a transformer last night at 0240. That is not an electrical footprint, it's a person." Aria looked at Nate and the small war of trust softened in her expression. She reached for his hand without pretense. "Trust me," she said, exactly the thing he had told her earlier and had meant in his own private way. "I will not let my sister be the story. If I had anything to do with that splice, I would have told you." She stopped because sometimes honesty needs a breath to fit. Nate had a choice. He could hold her at arm's length until evidence proved what he feared, or he could be the person who stood by the woman who had stolen a camera for a promise she made to a sibling. He chose then, with a clumsy hand, to lace his fingers with hers. They left the palisade with Priya's shoulder at their backs like a promise and Rex's relay tucked in the trunk like a bomb. With a decent personality, they had the blueprint, the Polaroid of Lina, the cam, and a splice with a fingerprint that wasn't a fingerprint at all but an invitation, someone precise, someone theatrical, someone who wanted the world to watch in the exact frame they had chosen. Nate drove them out of the city with a quiet in the car that felt like a fragile truce. Aria rested her head on the seat and breathed. She said low and private, "Tomorrow we stop being late." He turned to look at her and thought of the words he had used earlier, "be the act," and realized she had been doing that long before he met her tonight. She'd almost died because someone had a score and a script and thought themselves a conductor. Tomorrow they would try to turn the music back on them. Outside, the strip kept on, indifferent and brilliant, without choosing a side. Inside the car, two people who had almost lost a life to spectacle held hands in the dark and practiced being ordinary. It was the only kind of magic that mattered now. They didn't know who would blink next. They only knew one thing with terrible clarity: the collector had learned how to splice truth, and to beat someone who knows how to lie with film, you have to learn how to lie with the city. They built the plan like magicians build illusions, backwards from the reveal to the props, rehearsing misdirection, until every hand knew its lie. The collection of people who deserved to be called conspirators was small and oddly earnest. Aria, who read stagecraft the way others read maps. Nate, who could turn curiosity into patience. Priya, who could make arrest warrants behave like truth. Rex, who loved his machines enough to vandalize them for a cause. And reluctantly Colby Hart, at least in the sense that Colby had been forced by circumstance to be present and under observation. They had Rex's relay, the Polaroid, the microcam, a borrowed park and rig that could drown a yard in white and make a city's glare lie, and an appetite for timing that felt dangerously like faith. "Tonight we don't catch him on his terms," Aria said in the plastered calm of the old back room at Millie's, the diner that stored votive candles and secrets in equal measure. "We catch him on ours. He wants a performance, we'll give him one we choreographed." They wired the plan into 3 movements. Movement 1: turn the yard into a stage that does nothing but lie to the eye. Tape the backs of the signs with microcams, hide par cans and counterlights, plant a harmless transformer dummy that will look like a live feed, and get folks like Rex to call the fire marshal when it sparks. That would make the collector show his hand. Movement 2: make the rehearsal room into a believable trade spot for the collector's art, an exchange at 0333 that promises spectacle. Let a decoy with a real stand-in for Lina. Let the camera see what it expects: a person, a handoff, a flash of neon under it all. Priya would close in. Movement 3. Take the whole thing public. They would live stream a feed from 3 points: Nate's phone in the yard, Aria's microcam in the shed, and a hacked feed that would loop the rehearsal stage footage on a Palisade marquee across the strip for patrons to watch a city-sized theatrical. If the collector loved attention, he would take the bait. If he loved power, he'd take the frame. Either way, the spectacle would cost him his mask. They rehearsed until the muscles forgot they were tired. Aria taught Nate to hold a spotlight without looking like he wanted to keep it. They learned to speak in short sentences that could be repeated on cue. Priya taught them the economy of interrogation, how to frame a question so it forced a lie to reveal. It seems Rex swore a discouraging oath at every new bit of wiring he soldered, and then blessed them with more tools. Tess at Millie's made them coffee the way people make amulets hot, stubborn. Imperative. At midnight they started the business of being awake. Priya and 2 of her officers took up positions with Rex in the wings of the yard, visible only to the radios and to the law. They wore plain clothes underneath plain uniforms in case the collector had friends who loved being on camera. The idea was not to look like police so much as to look like bystanders. Aria and Nate ran the feed. Nate's phone, a small rig in an off-brand gimbal, would stream the yard. Aria's microcam would feed the shed. A routed cable from the museum's office, tampered with under Rex's careful hands, would force a loop of the rehearsal room footage onto the Palisade marquee. They called it their city projector because what else do you call a plan that turns a whole boulevard into a lie? "You ready to be famous for the right reason?" Nate asked her as they crept into the boneyard, the signs like sleeping alphabets casting long gentle shadows. She squeezed his hand once, brief, not possessive, and let go. "I'm ready to be seen," she said, "but not as an act." They started at 0300. They crawled into position like a troupe slipping into costume. Aria clipped a microcam beneath the 3rd sign in row C. Rex planted his faux transformer on a pad behind an old Stardust star. Priya positioned a small honest police light that would only blink if called. Nate hid the vis in the waistband under his jacket like contraband, and also like a prayer. At 0330 the transformer relay hummed a private tune. Rex had rerouted it through a kill switch disguised as a melon of corroded metal. At 0331 Nate felt his phone pulse with messages. "Are you sure? Be careful. Bring Lina home." They were all from people who had learned to love him. Thinly staff old contacts, the woman who still thought he owed apologies. He deleted them as if saving anyone's breath. 0333 was a small electric poem. The museum grid stuttered, just a whisper of the sequence Rex had found. Then, like a conductor trimming a phrase, 1 sign lit, then 2 more. The 3 axes in the yard stitched a ghost line of light that passed like a knife under the moon. The microcam winked. Nate's stream took it live across the strip. The Palisade marquee hacked for 15 seconds, flicked to their rehearsal footage, and then, as scheduled, to the live feed from the yard. People, anonymous hundreds. The collector did not believe in subtlety, he believed in clarity, and in making the city do the announcing for him. The pattern folded the way an origami bird folds, preordained and elegant. From the side gate, a figure materialized, not running, not hiding, someone wearing the patient poise of someone who has watched people panic and chosen a comfortable seat. He had a coat that loved shadow and a voice measured like a script. "You're early," he said, and the voice was neither old nor young. It was a voice that had practiced being unremarkable. He had a camera hanging around his neck like a rosary analog and heavy, one of those old things that look righteous because they predate suspicion. Aria froze very briefly. Nate thought he saw a memory flash across her face, an old pattern of recognition, and then she rearranged herself into a woman who did not belong to panic. "You said the neon would decide," she called back, keeping her voice public and steady. "You chose our stage. Step forward and claim it." He smiled the way people smile at strangers who have credulity they can sell. The man walked forward with his hands open, palms showing in a gesture that by theater tradition indicates one is not hiding a knife. Priya's team edged closer. The microcam captured the man's face in a way that didn't flatter him, and therefore told truth. Sharp nose, pale stare, a small scar at his left eyebrow like a punctuation mark someone had earned in bar fights. "Nobody's going to be harmed tonight," he said. "I never harm people, I collect patterns." "Patterns and people," Priya said into her radio, and the officers unfolded from the dark as if invited out of story. "Hands where I can see them." He did not comply. Instead, he put his hands into his coat and pulled out carefully, theatrically, a stack of Polaroids fanned like a gospel. Each image showed a person in the act of living, the kind of pictures that make witnesses of strangers. A laugh frozen in a restaurant, a child with ice cream, a woman crossing a street. Lina's face sat in the center like an accusation. The man held the Polaroids out as if offering flowers. You see, he said, I preserve what the city would forget. I show you the art of attention. I rectify the economy of disregard. Put the pictures down, Priya said. Stop, Aria told him, though she was not sure whether she was speaking to him or to herself. You took Lina. He met her eyes, and there was a calm so deep it seemed patient rather than cruel. I did take Lina, he said, but only to keep her safe from being forgotten like the rest. He explained word by careful word the thesis that had been years in the making, how neon remembers in splices and reels, how the city erases the quiet, how his method was to make the world slow down and pay attention. His name, when Nate's recorder finally recorded it, was Von Crow. The name landed with a soft impact of paper. Nate's brain filed it not as a revelation but as a box. The mystery now fit into Von Crow: collector, curator, romantic, or rapist. See how language will float men as sins, as art, until you cut the string. Aria's eyes narrowed as though trying to determine where she had once met the face, and found no answer in memory. Von's smile never reached the spot the scar made. You're not making him a gallery, Priya said, you're making him a kidnapper. Labels are how society sleeps, Von said. I prefer better insomnia. He stepped closer, camera clicking softly. I will release Lina at dawn if you will do me one service. I want to be seen tonight. The city watches you. Let it watch me for 10 minutes. Let it see what I have done. Then I will let her walk away. Nate saw the shape of the offer like the negative of a photograph, trading attention for life, ancient, transactional, and exactly the kind of frame a man like Von could count on. Priya's jaw tightened in a way that meant she could both refuse and also be pragmatic. In hostage crisis training, they teach you to calculate what you are willing to lose for what you need to gain. She had been a cop long enough to know life sits above public record every time. We do not make deals, she said, we make arrests. Von laughed, the small laugh of a man who already had lines in several newspapers. Arrest me and I swear on my archive you'll have a spectacle. CCTV badges, legal lines, but Lina will be a footnote in reports. But if you let the city watch me for 10 minutes, I will let her go untouched, released on the curb by the Stardust replica, to be taken unhurt by your men. He made his case with the pomp of a director and the studied confidence of someone who believes his death would be a performance. There was danger in bargaining on stage. A man like Von had learned the tricks of attention and of what a city believes in. The moral calculus would look messy on paper and even messier on the air. Priya looked at Nate and then at Aria like she expected both of them to have the answer ready. She had the answer she wanted in a training manual, and the one she would call into a judge. She did not pick either. 10 minutes, she said, on condition you let us monitor every inch and that you turn over anything with Lina in it to us at the first sign she has harmed. Von placed a Polaroid on the ground between them and set his foot beside it like a claim. Agreed, he said, and after 5 minutes, if any man tries to move me, I use the feed to make sure you never move again. Priya barked a quiet code into the radio. The officers closed in closer under the cover of the signbacks, rifles not raised but ready. Rex, white-faced and hands shaking, planted 2 hands on a transformer panel and watched the glow. He de-rigged for show like a father watching his child play with fire. Nate's phone was streaming to 1,000 viewers who thought they were watching spectacle. Each viewer was a witness or an accomplice depending on terms and taste. Von signaled for a pause, then he asked Aria for a favor. Please, Ms. Vale, stand where you will be seen. The city likes faces. She moved forward with the slow certainty of someone who knows the stage as friend and enemy both. She lifted her chin and stepped into the place Von had chosen. He gestured for Nate to hold the microcam so the feed would capture her in a frame that made the viewer lean. For 10 minutes the city's attention pivoted. The marquee looped their rehearsal footage like a metronome with an appetite and then swung to the live feed of Aria standing beneath a washed halo of neon. Von began his voice work. He recounted the story of each photo, how he had found it, who had been in it, how they had been almost forgotten. His cadence was hypnotic. The viewers in the comments typed their belief and their outrage. Some called him visionary, some called him criminal, some wanted to be part of his archive. The stream gathered a terrible weather of its own: curiosity, moral outrage, worship. Aria kept her face steady, but with each minute she grew paler. Nate's chest clenched with 1,000 small alarms. Priya's fingers itched on the radio like a musician's hand near a note they can no longer avoid. At minute 8 something happened that no one had scripted. A comment on the stream pinned itself by the dozen, an ugly chorus of a kind the city breeds when it is bored and hungry. Kill him, expose him. Live action. The crowd below the yard, some drawn by the marquee, some by the siren smell of spectacle, shifted from watchers to a mob with devices. Priya's eyes flicked like a cop reading the changing weather. She radioed the nearest unit to move in. The officers tightened their formation, and without command Priya gave the signal to arrest. They moved like a machine. Vaughn, trained and patient, did not bolt. He smiled like a man who had enough rehearsed grief to outlast a plan. He reached inside his coat for a small remote the size of a matchbox and pressed it. The par cannon Rex's rig erupted in a blinding white that painted the world the way a camera overexposes a scene. The microcams blinked to white. The crowd screamed. For a fraction of a second the world was nothing but white noise and the static of too much light. In that breath someone moved. A figure darted from the crowd to the opposite side of the yard, not running but woven into the pattern of exit like a ghost with a schedule. Priya swore and lunged. Nate's recorder took the flares. Aria's microcam caught a flash of a person with a hood pulling Lina through a gate no one had noticed, a silhouette swallowed by darkness and the sudden avalanche of street-level lights. The collector's agreement had been a theater of logic. Vaughn had promised a release on camera and then used the greed for spectacle like a smoke bomb. He had rehearsed too, the way you rehearse the misdirection, create a loop of attention while the real theft occurs on the perimeter. The man had been clever enough to weaponize the city's appetite for narrative against them. Priya's officers slammed into the crowd and a line collapsed into shove and push while the man with the remote, the machine with the scar on his eyebrow, was momentarily lost in a wash of people scrambling and phones recording. Rex cursed like a man who'd just been convinced his child would not come home. Nate ran blind and full of teeth toward the gate where the silhouette had gone. Aria, unspooling from her pose like a puppet freed from strings, sprinted with the practiced grace of someone who had once worked with falling people and meant never to repeat a fall. They reached the gate, an old service door partially obscured by a drift of cardboard and a forgotten marquee. The latch was twisted from the inside. The lock was old and had been forced with the kind of skill that says someone planned their exits carefully. Beyond the gate, a narrow alley led to an exterior service road. Footprints in dust told the path. 2 sets, then one, then none, but there were scuffs on the ground that suggested haste, and the scrape of a small cart, maybe Lina, thing that could carry a body low to the ground without announcing itself. They followed the trail to a dumpster pad and a service lift that would have taken a desperate person up to the side of a quiet building. From there the path forked like the trick in a magician's sleeve. Nate saw something that made his stomach drop, a small thread of red fabric snagged on a rebar jut. Lina's sequined costume, bright and useless as a flag, had been half shorn in the struggle. Someone had been careless. They kept moving. The city's noise became a pressure suit around them, compressing panic into lungs that would not stop. Priya called it in and the dispatch widened like a net, but the night had taught them one merciless truth: a man who plans his spectacles plans his escapes better. They found the maintenance shed at the edge of an industrial compound off Charleston, an anonymous place with a roll-up door that bit the night inside. Dust motes turned like applause. Empty racks stood like sentinels. A rigged camera they had not seen before recorded a single angle on the workbench. A bundle of fresh newspapers waited with a rock under them. Lina's phone, its screen was cracked but alive. Her latest unlocked message read, "If you love me, leave the light on." Nate wanted to scream through the skin of the world. He wanted to be violent. He wanted to be clever. He wanted all the things that would have done until this point what they had not done: bring Lina home. Priya scanned the shed and found a different kind of proof: damp footprints leading out onto a service stair that ran up to a catwalk. The path circled a maintenance hatch that opened to, of all things, the back of a retired marquee mounted above the freeway that slid both ways. Maintenance access, not public. Someone had used the catwalk like a stage manager uses a ladder. It gave them access to the rooftops without being seen by cameras mounted lower. They followed upward, breath measured and cautious, the city's neon through long slithering shadows. From the roof they could see a corridor of signs stretching like a tired parade. A figure moved at the far end of the row, small and quick. Priya signaled silent pursuit. They closed. The figure, hood up, head down, ducked into the anatomy of a giantess on the stardust letter. They were almost on them when the figure spun and threw something metal and small that arced and connected with the side of the letter in a ringed, sick sound that cancelled out their approach. It was a trip flare, metallic, not lethal but brilliant and blinding. The flare popped, the world cracked open, and when the light faded the figure had vanished. In the settling hush on the stardust support beam they found a message scrawled in grease: "You are playing with light. I am the one who chooses." Vaughn had not been reckless, he had been meticulous. The decoy trade was a lesson in theater, a man who timed his misdirection to a pinhole and kept his prize in motion. The city had watched, but it had watched his show. The collector had turned attention into camouflage. They radioed back down. Priya's voice was a chopped thing, professional even now and furious. "He has gone to ground. We have leads. We'll get her." Nate wanted to believe her as if belief were an affidavit. He wanted to hold that sentence in his mouth until it tasted like promise. Instead, what he could offer was a different kind of work, patience and stubbornness, and a new plan. They would not trade public attention for humanity again. They would not let the city's appetite decide the scale of their grief. In the morning, the Palisade would run a story that made them look like credits on someone else's film. The stream would be full of pundits and anonymous commentators, and opinion. Von Crow would be a myth. In the hours when myths are easiest to believe, Lina would still be a person in need of rescue. They filed back down to the yard like people leaving a theater after the lights go up. The marquee stuttered between looping the footage and the emergency alerts that police were beginning to push out. Rex swore once into his sleeve and then again like a prayer. Aria stood at the edge of the yard and stared at the sky where the neon had been. The afterimage a weak bruise. She wrapped her arms tight around herself as if attempting to hold a shape without touching it. Nate came up behind her and put both hands on her shoulders, light and steady. "You led," he said, which was the smallest praise and the biggest duty he could offer. "We were a team," she said. Her voice had the tiredness of someone who had given away a piece of herself and been taught how to take it back. "He gave us a choice and we took the one that looked like daylight. He used that daylight to pull a curtain. We have to take the curtain down." "How?" Nate asked. He loved her because she was brave in ways he needed her to be and reckless in ways he refused to admit frightened him. She turned to him, her eyes searching the underside of whatever mood he brought into the night. "We changed the stage," she said. "We stopped giving him a place to stand." It sounded simple and also like everything they had to do for Lina. They filed reports, took evidence to Priya, and held their breath for the forensics that would not forgive anyone quick. The city closed around them in a soft and crushing way. Von Crow was still out there and Lina was still somewhere afraid, and the neon, the city's constant accordion of light and forgetfulness, hummed on indifferent. At noon, when the sun cut a white path through the dust, Nate sat in his car with the vis on the passenger seat and watched the footage again. It played like a relic. There were frames he had not seen in the chaos of the night. Small decoys, a man slipping a microchip inside the casing of a transformer, a hand painting a number 333 on concrete with a fingertip, a camera lens turned inward so it recorded the frame of a frame. The collector was not just a thief of people, he was a thief of perspective, and he had spent his life making people pay attention on his terms. Nate played the tape until he recognized a tiny sound at the very edge of the audio, the squeak of a shoe on metal, a whisper of nylon against steel, the sort of detail you only hear when you listen with the moral intent of a man who will not let someone be hidden again. They were tired, they were alive, they were for now a collective of people who had all learned something the hard way. The city will watch, but being watched does not mean being saved. Saving requires bravery that looks like paperwork and patience and sometimes foolishly love. They made a new plan on a napkin in Millie's with more coffee than sense. They would not go public with the full footage. They would not let Vaughn's theater rewrite the script. They would tighten their net, call in favors, bait him with better light, make the city too costly for him to use. They would take the stage from him, and this time they would leave no backdoor open. Aria pushed her coffee away and looked at Nate as if asking whether he would go along with a part that required him to bet the rest of his life on another's courage. He did not hesitate. The city was dangerous. She was more dangerous in the right way. He loved her not because she was flawless, but because she would not allow his fear to be a thing she could not meet. At dusk they met Priya outside her cruiser and walked the block to a small pawn shop that had once been a chapel. There was a man there, hands that smelled of solder and hope. He was not Vaughn, but he had been the man who had mended the slot relays for decades and who could, with some coaxing and a ledger for payment, tell you the difference between the sound of a timer and the sound of a human hand. "We need to know the man who writes with tape," Nate said. The man who called himself Gus pointed to a picture on his wall, a postcard of the strip dated long enough ago to be polite. He squinted. "You want the kind of person who used to run film loops in old museums," Gus said. "He likes to work in analog because analog leaves fingerprints. If you want him, you follow the things that don't make sense, like a tape labeled 0333 that shows the same room with different wrists." They began to stitch the clues together. Vaughn's taste for Polaroids, his penchant for old media, his hunger for attention. There were names they pulled from a map of the city's underbellies: repairmen, late-night riggers, collectors with an aesthetic sense like a religion. Someone suggested a man who ran a neon reclamation yard out near the dam road. Someone else suggested a retired magician who lost his audience to Vegas and found a new one in the city's shadows. They made a list long enough to scare them and short enough to be actionable. They left Millie's and went home to sleep, if sleep is a thing you can hold after someone else decides when lights belong to whom. The long con had ended in a thin failure. Lina still missing, Vaughn still free, the collector's theater intact, but it had also taught them the shape of his methods, where he loved to stand, and how the city's appetite could be shaped into a trap rather than a stage. They had taken a hit, but they had new evidence, a clearer path, and the kind of anger that makes good theater out of revenge. That night, as the strip hummed with indifferent light, Nate lay awake and thought of the small greasy message on the stardust I had read earlier. "You are playing with light, I am the one who chooses." He wanted to answer the sentence with a shout and a plan and a pistol and a law. Instead he whispered into the dark, for Lina, for Aria, for the city they could save, not by making spectacle of it but by making the quietness enough to be heard. "Tomorrow," he said into the silence, "we change the rules." They called it the last hand because Von Crow loved card metaphors. Everything to him was a trick with an audience and a payoff. They called it the last hand because if they lost, Lina would become a final frame in someone else's archive. They called it the last hand because by then the word last tasted like courage. They met at dusk at a neutral place, an old bus depot repurposed into a rehearsal studio with paint still flaking from 100 sets. Priya arrived with subpoenas in a folder and a look that belonged to people who could meet grief and make it useful. Rex arrived exhausted and exhilarated. He rewired the relay so it could be a decoy or a trap depending on the switch. Gus the repairman brought tools and a list of names, each one a small ugly map of where analog fetishists lived. Tess from Millie S. brought a thermos of coffee that was violent and practical. Nate arrived with the vis and his recorder and a temperament that had learned to be stubborn about truth. Aria arrived last, boots on, hair braided back, the look of a woman who decided this would end on the side she chose. Hoover Dam was a spectacle already, the concrete mammal that hushed the Colorado and made a river perform. Vaughn had asked for the dam. He'd written on gallery postcards about places that remember light, and the dam fit the thesis, an engineered monument with both history and the capacity to eclipse millions of private memories under a single enormous face. If he could turn the dam into his stage, if he could make the city itself bend its attention there, he'd make a tableau the world couldn't ignore. He'd send a tape that would be an elegy everyone watched. Their plan had more steps than any of them liked to say aloud. The gist: use the collector's hunger for spectacle against him, build a fake marquee loop, fake broadcast, force Vaughn to take his show to the dam, and then take his last hand away. Priya would coordinate traffic, state police would hold perimeter, Rex and Gus would manage relay and power, Nate would stream a live feed to thousands' eyes used as evidence. Aria would be the visible prize on stage, a bait that would be less bait and more a trained decoy. They split into two teams, decoy and recovery. The decoy would give Vaughn what he wanted, an audience and a visible Aria, while the recovery team would move according to the map they purchased out of garbage and old blueprints, tunnels, underservice roads, maintenance catwalks, a back approach Vaughn didn't know how to see. They rehearsed the choreography until their hands could do it blind. They rehearsed the cadence of the arrest, who would call what, where the cameras should point, when Priya would move the risky bit, how to ensure Vaughn didn't simply trade Lina for the spectacle and run had been solved with legal and moral bluntness. Priya had a sealed warrant and two covert teams positioned to cut off his exits. She also had a negotiated concession Vaughn couldn't take on faith if he presented Lina unharmed at the public handoff. Priya would allow a brief statement to be recorded as evidence of his intent and methodology before cuffs went on. It was not justice, it was a clean courtroom opening. Vaughn, who loved a frame, took the offer as if it were an ovation. On the night the strip's neon seemed exhausted, colors a little tired, the way a chorus line would be after its last bend. The stage set for Vaughn's performance was twofold: the visible area on the dam's maintenance catwalk that would be lit and streamed, and the invisible labyrinth of access ways below where Priya's team and the recovery crew would move. They staged Aria as the visible focus. She would appear on a short section of catwalk, wearing a jacket that was not showy and looked like anyone might stand there to watch the river. She would play the visible role of the person who had nothing to do with Lina and everything to do with drawing Alejandro's eye. Nate's live stream went up, the viewers stacked like a rising tide. People watched for art, for horror, for the satisfaction of seeing a dark thing brought into the open. Aria stood under a wash of light wind from the canyon, making the fabric of her jacket act like a small flag. Vaughn arrived like a man who knows applause is his currency. He had a camera around his neck and a satchel of evidence. He curated like an archivist on a mission. He is thinner in person, Nate thought, less theatrical, more pallid. Up close you could see the small old scars, the hands that had assembled thousands of postcards, the little paper cuts of obsession. He spoke in the tone of someone who had rehearsed his grievance into a philosophy. I will not hurt the quiet, he said into the camera, I will make them look He laid out his argument like a sermon with slides: how the city forgot people, how he intervened to preserve them, how attention is a sacrament. He saw himself as a curator. It's important when you fire a clip at a person's moral life to grant them their own language. It makes later judges and juries uneasy. Vaughn offered images, Polaroids, reels, evidence of people who had been in his account rescued from anonymity by being placed under his gaze. As the minutes passed and his voice smoothed into practiced cadence, Aria felt the room in her bones. The live feed gathered strangers like moths. They leaned into their screens. People typed and argued in hundreds. Vaughn eased the offer. He would release Lina if the city watched him for 5 minutes, and then an additional 5 to make the leap. He wanted to justify that what he had done was necessary. Priya mouthed the time to a partner. 3 minutes left until they moved. At 70 seconds to go, the recovery team moved under the dam's belly. Nate watched the shadow play on his phone and felt grateful for the analog stubbornness of the vs. He'd been carrying. It made him like less the polished lies streaming on the public feed and more the grainy truth of what could not be faked. With a filter, Gus and Rex were at the service hinge. They would cut the route Vaughn might use to flee, block lifts, and if necessary throw the man's own staging into knots. Vaughn's voice made applause into floodlights. He asked that he be allowed a statement so the city could see his method. Priya signaled the team the cuffs were ready. The plan counted on the man's vanity to get him to reveal the seams. They counted on his need to be seen. When the exchange came, Vaughn reaching for Lina from a dark corner where she'd been hidden, the recovery team took a step that hadn't been visible on any rehearsal. Aria and the decoy moved in sync, and at the same time the recovery team executed a minor bit of theater. They triggered a staged power jog on a downstream transformer. The dam's lights flickered briefly in an orchestrated strobe. Vaughn, who ran his world by the scale of attention, looked up. That tilt of the head was his mistake. Priya's team moved in and cut power to his exits. One of Vaughn's assistants, a wiry young man in a hood, tried to dart and was caught. The assistant carried a soundless wristband of steel that was supposed to be a key. He dropped it when Priya's hand closed around his collar. The dam's echoes swallowed their scuffle like a theater swallowing missteps. Then everything shifted because Vaughn refused to be the obvious villain, and because stories like his often include a last strange mercy. He presented Lina like a small terrified statue and walked toward the center of the catwalk to make his statement. He asked for the mic. "You wanted the city," he said, addressing cameras and people as one merciless organism. "You wanted to see me see this." He opened his satchel and began to pull out Polaroids, tapes, and a set of index cards. He spoke of the people he'd saved, of the moments he'd preserved. He said the words with such conviction that seconds on the feed turned into argument, but in the same breath, his eyes flicked to the side where a recovered route's shadow moved, watching for the tell of the arrest. That flicker was all Priya needed. She gave the sign. The collars went on. Vaughn's fingers closed around a Polaroid as if to keep it whole, and then a hand, Aria's, not Priya's, took it from him and held it up to the camera. On it was a picture of a woman asleep in a room, guilt and private, and the small caption Vaughn insisted read, "She will be remembered now." The camera recorded everything. They cuffed Vaughn in the white light. He did not make a scene. He did not give them the crisis he'd been constructing on every sidewalk. He seemed almost relieved, like a man who had finally found a frame that meant something to him other than ownership. Priya read him his rights with a voice that had every syllable filed in case the media tried to make this into theater. But then something happened that made the night resemble a smaller, truer kind of miracle. In the crowd of people watching online and at the dam, a cascade of small actions occurred. Several viewers called in tips. Some people recognized props in Vaughn's Polaroids and texted names. A retired rigging tech, one of Gus's old contacts, sent a message to Nate that included the name of a storage unit Vaughn had near the airport. The city which Vaughn thought he had owned with his frames proved stubborn, and ordinary people used their phones to give names and places and collectively made an exit route that would have been unspooled into thin air if Vaughn had been alone. They untied Lina's bindings. She trembled in the hands of 2 officers and then looked for Aria like someone who knows what rescue costs and what it pays back in debt. When their eyes met, Lina sobbed, not the theatrical cry of someone caught in a story, but the raw, quiet sound of a person deciding they might still keep their life. They took Vaughn away. He did not yell. He told them as officers lifted him into a cruiser that he would not stop what he did until people learned to notice one another on their own. He said it like an apology and a plan. Priya didn't argue. She had courtroom choreography to make truth hold in a legal frame. Her mouth had learned to be a hinge in rooms where people asked the law to be moral. Later in interviews and on Nate's recorder they would debate whether Vaughn was a monster, a vigilante, a misguided archivist. For now, as the cruiser's red and blue blinked through the canyon, Aria leaned against the rail and let the Colorado shove itself forever downstream. Nate put his arm around her with a gentleness that had grown firm in the last few weeks. "Are you okay?" he asked. She laughed once, soft and raw. "I will be," she said. "We are." They walked Lina off the catwalk and into Priya's car, hugged her and told her what they could that night. They told her that she was safe now, that they had plans for care, for counseling, for a kitchen at Millie's where people would let her be small and ordinary again. Lina squeezed Aria and Nate, and then Priya, who met the squeeze with a fierce bureaucratic kindness. A folder with names and numbers appeared like a sun breaking through cloud. When the dust settled, if dust ever settles on this kind of thing, Vaughn's arrest was not the last frame. It was a beginning for the prosecution to figure out how to translate aesthetic theft into law. It was also for the internet, the kind of thing that created podcasts and think pieces. Nate's episode of Off the Record that week was careful. It presented the facts, the footage, the ways the city had been used like a camera, and most of all, the faces of the people who had been loved into danger. His listeners argued they also sent money to Lina's recovery fund. People are messy. Sometimes messy means they help. In the weeks that followed, the city did what cities do. It tried to turn pain into policy. Legislative aides filed proposals to require better maintenance of public power grids, to require registries for large-scale light installations, to give museums and neon yards better surveillance protocols. Priya gave testimony. Rex testified about relay tampering with the stoicism of craftsmen who always hated vandalism. Gus gave a surprisingly eloquent statement about cultural artifacts and the wrong hands. Vaughn's trial became horrifically and inevitably a stage for competing stories. Defense argued for nuance, prosecutors argued for custody. Aria and Nate learned the subtler scripts of recovery. They learned painfully and gratefully how to sit with Lina in the small hours while she told them what had happened without asking them to fix her. In one sentence, they went to therapy sessions, testified in court, and together built a rhythm where kindness outweighed spectacle. Aria returned to the stage months later, but not the same. She performed on terms. She set benefits for battered arts crews, rehearsals scheduled around safety funds raised for costume room staff to have emergency support. She became, in a quiet way, a curator of care rather than an object of spectacle. Nate's work changed. The podcast that had once traded on edge turned into a platform for victims and for craft, for the analog people who, in a world of slick digital narratives, still had fingerprints. He won little awards from journalism outfits that liked complicated work and longer forms. He got hate mail, he got praise, he gained the kind of credibility that cost you sleep and gave you something like a conscience. They remained a pair, two people who had loved under a sky that wanted to sell astonishment. The romance that grew between them was not cinematic fireworks. It was the slow accumulation of shared coffee, shared watchfulness, the willingness to show up for someone who might ask you to be brave in plain ways. They kissed on a quiet street after the trial when the lights were not trying to make anything of them, and it felt like something private and durable. As for Vaughn, he spent months in custody, and the legal work to pin him down involved forensics and testimony and a public reckoning with what it means to preserve someone without consent. In court, the defense argued art, mental health, obsession. The prosecution argued kidnapping and coercion. The jury, the press, the city argued back and forth in the way democracies argue, messy, loud, but not always unjust. He was convicted on charges that included kidnapping and tampering with critical infrastructure. The sentence was heavy enough to keep him away for many years, and it included a mandatory counseling requirement that made a small private part of the public hope he might one day be less dangerous. At Millie's, they celebrated small things. Lina's return to work, a fundraiser that paid for a storage unit's security overhaul. Rex's decision to open a legit repair shop with insurance. Gus got his little plaque in the shop window. Priya took a long overdue vacation. She came back with sand in her shoes and a patience that fit her like a new jacket. Tess kept pouring coffee and pretending not to like pats on the back. Nate wrote his long piece in a single sobering weekend. He read it into his recorder and let it sit like a stone in the mouth of the city. He and Aria decided not to monetize the episode beyond the help fund for Lina. The episode's last minutes were spare a photo of Lina with the caption, "Present," a list of resources for victims of abduction and coercion, and a sentence where Nate read his own failure and his own promise. It went viral not because of the drama but because of its honesty. Months later, in a quiet conclusion that pleased Aria and annoyed every publicity director who missed a chance for a dramatic line, the city passed a regulation that made large-scale light displays require an impact assessment. Nobody claimed it saved the world, it just made some things more expensive to weaponize. On a late spring evening, Nate and Aria drove out of town with Lina, who insisted on a small detour to a dusty roadside with a view of desert and sky. They parked, got out, and walked to the rim of a small bluff there under a sky that had not been arranged by anyone as marquee. They let silence be ordinary. Lina held a small clay figure Mara had made for her, a pair of hands separated by a gap. "It's not for touching," Lina said, smiling. "It's south for remembering how close we were." Aria took Nate's hand. Nate, who had once thought bravery was a headline, now thought of it like a day's work you didn't sign up for because it looked good. He squeezed and kissed her thumb the way you kiss a promise. They stood with Lina and watched the desert keep moving in time. The trauma that had once tried to make heroes and monsters of them all settled into the quieter work of living. Vaughn in prison wrote letters, some dangerous, some confused, some oddly remorseful. They were archived in a legal file, and in Nate's memory people argued about him in op-eds and in diners. Some still called him visionary, some had no patience for arguments that wrapped cruelty in aesthetic language. The world as it does kept both conversations going. The final tape, someone asked Nate once at a reading in a voice that sounded like the world's tired curiosity what was on the tape that explained why 333. Nate's answer was simple: because the truth is often small and precise. 333 was a hinge, a moment of slack that the city gives between shifts, when people blink, when cameras roll over tapes, when lights misalign, and someone with patience can take advantage. Vaughn found that hinge and made it his. He loved the hinge because it let him believe he could preserve things by making them monumental. They beat him by making the hinge public and by refusing to let the city's appetite be a single man's tool. In the end, what felt most like victory was not a headline or a conviction. It was the way Lina learned to sleep without checking doors, and the way Aria taught a small troupe of performers to take safety seriously without losing artistry. It was Rex opening a small storefront with a sign that said repair and care. It was Gus selling a heart-shaped postcard for charity. It was the way Tess made a new soup and called it Lina's Goodnight. They had been in a place where spectacle tried to own people. They had chosen instead to be the people who remember to make things that are private public in the right ways. Resources, safety nets, names and addresses for help. They had learned to be witnesses who knew when to keep their mouths shut and when to speak very loudly. The last hand had been played and turned into something else, a lesson that in a city built on lights and the illusion of wonder, the truest work is not in making people watch but in making sure nobody's life becomes an exhibit without consent. When Nate published the episode as closing lines, spoken softly with all the learned restraint of a man who watched the costs of rush, the words landed simple and true. "We don't get to collect people, we collect care."